Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey, Trey.
Welcome.
Hey, Leila, Shakira. Hey.
How are you guys?
We're doing
Pretty good.
great.
Pretty good.
I'm seeing some great persons in the chat. Welcome to the Let's Unpack It team. We have She Moves Zumba. Welcome. Judy Thompson. Good morning to you as well. Love to see it. Love to see it. There you go. So we're just going to give persons just about 2 more minutes. We'll start at 10:04, the discussion. But in the meantime, I just want to welcome everyone. Today is day 1 of our Mental Health Call to Action Instagram Live series. And today we will be discussing just some background of our Caribbean Youth Mental Call to Action, and then giving some context of mental health within the Caribbean region. So because this is a Caribbean-wide mental health call to action, I would love for everyone joining the chat to just put in the comments where you're from, where you're calling from, where you're joining us from. I'm from Trinidad, but I am joining from Barbados right now. So you can just put in the chat where you are calling from. This is one Caribbean and there's one call to action. Oh, we have Barbados. Any other Caribbean countries in the chat? We have Trinidad joining in. Awesome, awesome.
We are in Barbados, South
You're
Coast.
in Barbados.
Sunny day.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Barbados, Trinidad.
That's in St. Kitts. We have keep sending in the flags. That's okay if you're joining in from the UK. Once you have Caribbean youths, you're welcome to join.
Or even if you don't.
Or even if you don't, welcome to join. Okay, so let's get started. So as I said before, today's session, we're going to give an overview of our mental health call to action. And for those who don't know, I will describe it a little bit more. And we'll be launching this call to action on World Mental Health Day, which is on October 10th, which is just 9 days away. So very, very exciting. And these lovely persons we have on the panel with us, we have Leila and Shakira from Dance for Life Barbados. And we also have Trey Cumberbatch, who is also a youth advocate and a youth mental health advocate as well on the call to help bring on the discussion and talk about mental health in the Caribbean and some of the needs that we have and some of the trends that we're seeing. We want everyone to continue to engage with us and join in on the conversation by sending us messages, using emojis, sending your comments and questions in the chat, and we will try to engage everyone as much as we can, as much as possible. So we all know mental health is a dire problem within the Caribbean, and it's something that is not addressed to its full capacity and is still not yet prioritized. And it's because of this is why we have developed this mental health call to action. And what this is, it is essentially a document where we are prioritizing and calling for our policymakers, governments, decision makers, advocates to prioritize leadership, research, regulations, and services. We really want everyone within our mental health space, within our policymaking and decision-making spaces to prioritize these things so that the mental health of our Caribbean people, especially our Caribbean youth, would be a priority, because for far too long, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, it has not been a priority. And if it's one thing the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us thus far, is that our mental health needs to be at the forefront, and everyone has been impacted in some way, big or small. Before I dive in a little bit more into the call to action, before we dive a little bit more into the call to action, We would like to set the context and set the stage for how we got here, and talk about context of, that's okay, to talk about the mental health context in the Caribbean. So to get started, I would like to ask Trey. We all know that mental health hasn't been a priority within the Caribbean, but the WHO is taking one step further into getting the discussion about mental health and prioritizing mental health across the globe. Recently, the WHO has launched their mental health action plan, where they prioritize the core concept of there's no health without mental health. And that is a very powerful statement and a very powerful principle that they are embarking on. From your perspective as a young male, a young Caribbean person, just a young person in general, how do you think the Caribbean has measured up to this concept, this core principle of there's no health without mental health?
Well, thanks, Stephanie, and good day to everyone in the audience. And you alluded to it just now. I think we're making a lot of promising progress in living up to that mantra. And when I say that, I bring to mind things like the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and what you all are doing with this call to action. There's some outstanding youth advocacy going on. Shout out to Let's Unpack It, shout out to You Report, all over the region. They're doing wonderful work in that regard, and Dance for Life as well. But there are just some things that we still have to address as a region before I can feel confident in us saying that we definitely live up to that mantra of there is no health without mental health. One of the main things is that there's still a lot of stigma surrounding mental health. If someone, God forbid, breaks their hand, like nobody's going to say, oh, you know, it's just all in your head, stuck it up, move on. Like, of course, you would be very concerned, but at a very cultural level, we still dismiss mental health and its seriousness in that regard. If you want to go on the more government level, there's a lack of funding. Because in 2017, there was actually some research done, and they estimated that on average, Caribbean governments only allocate about 4.3% of their health budget to mental health care, which is tragic, to be honest. And for me, that screams, yeah, we're not really prioritizing mental health as much as we should be as a region. There are issues like there's not really a lot of research going into mental health, especially young people's mental health at a lot of local levels. And just some other things, think about, for example, with sick days. Do we provide mental health days for our workers the same way that we provide sick days for workers? And one that I would say is a bit of a personal peeve for me is the whole issue surrounding bereavement leave. I've been having discussions with people and I've been trying to do research, but admittedly not a terrible amount of information is out there. But I've heard that in most instances, bereavement leave can only be granted up to 5 working days. In the audience, you could let me know if you've heard anything longer than that. But I'm just saying all this to say that while we are having a lot more conversations about the importance of mental health, in terms of our actions and our attitudes, I think we still have a long way to go.
Totally agree with you. And I want persons who's joining us on the live main chat to comment and give us some input. How do you think your Caribbean country has been engaging with the concept, there's no health without mental health? What are some examples for your country? Is that something you're seeing implemented with your ministries of health? Let us know in the comments as much as you can. We have Let's Unpack It saying, on top of that, the funding isn't allocated to the importance of awareness and prevention campaigns. That's totally true. And one of the best steps, to addressing any kind of health issue is to have important informational and educational campaigns and prevention campaigns. As we say, prevention is always better than cure. So it's really important for us to invest in those campaigns as well. So Trey, you talked about the budgets only giving about 4% or so to mental health services and to mental health care. How would you describe the mental health care system within the Caribbean now based on that? I didn't even know that's so little bits of money. So how do you think that has affected our mental health care system that's existing in the Caribbean?
Well, in my view, I don't think it is as responsive as it could be, especially to the population's mental health needs. And one of the biggest implications I see for a lack of funding is, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lack of research. And to define a population's mental health needs, you're going to have to conduct research on what that population's mental health is like. So because we don't have the funding, in large part, we are not conducting the research to say, well, this is what we need for our population. This is where our population is at, and this is how we can address it, and even proactively put things in place. So, as you said, prevention is better than cure. And then that has a further implication, I believe, of interventions. Speaking as a young person, especially in my experience as a Barbadian youth, but again, in the audience, if you want to agree, if you want to disagree, feel so to do so in the comments. But I would say that there aren't a lot, if any, interventions that I could say are really youth specific, that tailor to my specific mental health needs as a young person. And then if you, and slight gender plug here, but if you consider the whole idea of the fact that we have multiple identities as individuals, so I'm not just Trey, you know, I am also Trey in terms of my faith, I'm also Trey in terms of my gender identity, I'm also Trey in terms of my sexuality. All of those are things that need to be considered when you're talking about service delivery and intervention planning. And going back to what you asked in terms of the lack of funding, I think that funding and policy are key. I cannot stress these enough. I think if we are to develop those tailored interventions, I think we need that funding. I think we need those policies to guide that funding in the first place. I think we need the research. I think we need so much, but I only have so much time here, so yeah.
I can feel your passion through it, and I totally agree. And we have some persons in the chat also agreeing with you. So I think what you're saying is true, and we all need all hands on deck to deal with it. Continue to send in your comments in the chat, any questions you have for us to tackle during our live session today, and any comments that you have as well. Now, Shakira and Leila, you have been engaged within the children and youth space within Barbados for a long time, long before the pandemic, and even now during and now after. I say after in quotes because we know the pandemic isn't over yet. Yeah. What are some of the trends you have seen with regards to emotional health and well-being from before the pandemic when you were dealing with young persons, as well as now after or during? What are some of the changes you would have witnessed?
So I think that, first of all, just to point out, Dance for Life, our primary focus is not mental health specifically, it's sexual and reproductive health. But through our program, and we always have a whole person approach. So mental health obviously is a huge part of that. And when we look at self-efficacy for young people to be able to translate certain knowledge into behavior change, we need to have that whole person approach. So mental health has been something that has been highlighted more and more by young people prior to COVID as being an issue. We have a National Youth Council that helps to inform our programs, made up of young people that have gone through the program from across the island. And over the past few years, I would say prior to COVID, they were really highlighting this is something we need to focus on more. And that was primarily, I would say, from an academic perspective of young people just really struggling with the academic pressures of our Caribbean system. And
also pressures from home. You know, they felt overwhelmed and they felt that nobody understood that they were having a hard time balancing their plates, trying to keep up with the academic rigors as well as the parental expectations, extracurricular activities. Of course, these were kids that were really focused on university and university applications, and then time for themselves and socializing, and they felt like it was affecting their mental health and nobody quite understood.
And then since COVID, I would say that we've seen a lot of these same issues just becoming more prevalent across the board, across all the different secondary schools, and they're all just being exacerbated. So academic pressure being exacerbated, issues with parents or feeling like parents didn't understand. Some of the other issues we have with our more vulnerable youth, so issues with domestic violence, gender-based violence, those things being exacerbated, which obviously impact mental health. We've always collected data and had a strong evidence base for our program. And so prior to COVID, again, we had started collecting data on mental health. And then when the pandemic started, we created more questions, and we saw a significant worsening of mental health. About 35% of students reported a worsening in their mental health within the first few months of the pandemic. And, you know, almost 45% of students said that they were feeling sad and helpless, lonely for more than 2 weeks in a row from the start of the pandemic. So a lot of significant worsening that we noted pretty quickly on.
And I think, just to wrap that up, I think when we look at the main differences that we saw pre-pandemic and, you know, during pandemic, is that the number of children that reported mental health issues to us were quite small and focused on those academic pressures. And now it is a wide cross-section of young people. I think virtually all the young people that we spoke to have some level of mental health concern, just stemming from isolation, and, you know, get into the reasons later.
Awesome. And I really think that, you know, what you stated is true. Like, not even children. I know you dealt with a lot of secondary school age children, but I see common trends throughout primary school, as well as persons older than secondary school age that are still considered to be young people. You know, those who are in tertiary education, persons in their early 20s, mid 20s, all experiencing very similar issues. And I think that's something that we need to bring awareness to. And youth and young people spread across the spectrum. From as young as 5 years old to, as you know, my age. I'm 26 and I'm still considered a young person, and I'm still experiencing very similar issues as persons within the secondary school age group as well. I'm just want to encourage.
Sorry, I was just going to say, with the younger young people, is that very often their mental health concerns are not taken seriously. They're told by parents and by general population that, you know, how at 14 years old, do you have any stress? How are you complaining about this? How could you possibly have any mental health issues? So their experiences are just not being validated in any way, and that's a huge problem.
Exactly, and that's some of the things we need to, you know, break that cycle with. You know, at any age, someone can experience a mental health issue. At any age, there's no cap, there's no minimum, there's no maximum. And I think that's one of the things that we need to continue advocating for. That's one of the things that within our mental health call to action that we are also pushing and advocating for. There's no age. Everyone should be prioritized within their policy, within the policies, within the services that are provided across the age spectrum. But we want to give that emphasis on young persons because, as you said, we tend to be dismissed and saying, as you know, at 14, at 13, at 19, you know, what problems could you have? You see,
and then there's also the rhetoric of young people, you know, being seen as resilient, but at some point they're going to break. If you keep pushing them like that, they're going to break. And so many of the young people that, you know, we work with in Barbados, especially some of our more vulnerable youth, are dealing with issues that adults would struggle to deal with. And so at some point you're going to push too hard and they can't be that resilient forever. There need to be systems in place to support them.
Exactly. I'm seeing some person in chat. I see Kimmy saying that the Caribbean mentality that kids don't or shouldn't even have these experiences or feelings. Totally agree with you, Kimmy. Yes, prioritize, destigmatize, and normalize mental health. That is one of our mantras for this entire call to action. So continue to use it. We have
a question. I think one of the things.
Continue.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that's important to note here is that it's not all bleak. One of the things that we have noticed is that because of the pandemic, mental health has really been brought to the forefront. A lot of young people do feel a lot more comfortable to talk about their mental health. And we've talked to parents through the PTAs at our secondary schools that have said, you know, in trying to address their young people's mental health issues, they've recognized some latent mental health issues in themselves, you know, and that's always a good thing.
Anything to add, Trey?
I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think one of the biggest obstacles young people in the Caribbean face too is, how to put this kindly, having parents who do not take mental health seriously. There are a lot of persons in the preceding generations that see not going to therapy as some kind of flex, as in like, oh my gosh, I've never been to therapy or I've never needed therapy. And I acknowledge that our generation, we have the benefit of, we have a lot more access to knowledge, resources about these things. So we're a lot more aware about these things. But then when your parent, you know, someone who's been an authoritative and ideally loving figure in your life for basically all of your life, and when you see them having that kind of attitude, it creates like a whole set of problems. Like, it makes me think, well, I can't necessarily talk to my parent about this and get some kind of empathy or support from them, or I can't necessarily seek professional help if I think that's necessary with their support, because then they're just going to tell me, oh, you don't need therapy. You just need to suck it up, or life is hard. And I personally feel that a lot of people with address trauma, but that's just my view. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on the issue.
Yeah, and I think like add into that, Trey, there's also just this normalization of all of these different things. You know, even when we look at abuse, and so many parents might respond by saying, oh, well, I dealt with it and I'm fine, so you can deal with it. And it's, you know, is that helpful? Yes, they dealt with it and maybe they're okay, but is that really creating a whole well person? Probably not so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. We have a question in the chat for specifically for the. So, have you had any experience with recommending young persons to mental health care services, whether it be a sponsor or private? And what has that been like, if you have?
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely have, for a wide range of issues. You know, we have seen an uptick, I would say, prior to the pandemic, not specifically related to the pandemic, of self-harm within the secondary school system. And so in Barbados, there weren't strong mechanisms for referral. That has since, I would say, changed a little bit. There's more of a concrete policy on how you know, what avenues in which you take to help a child that you see that's in need. But there are lots of different scenarios that we have encountered in which we've had to, you know, intervene a little bit, give a little bit of a push, and certainly refer on.
But I think it also just really highlights the gap in our system with having support services in place that are specific to mental health. You know, very often we're in schools, so we work with the Health and Family Life Education Program and very closely with the guidance counselors, but the guidance counselors are burdened and that may not be their specific area of expertise. So having someone assigned to every school, I think that's something that's supposed to be done. We haven't necessarily seen it yet to know that it's actually, you know, there's an assigned person.
Yeah, one of the things that we hear, I mean, I'm not sure if in the other islands it's similar to Barbados, but schools here are stratified in terms of educational levels. And we hear a lot from the young kids that guidance counselors are really focused in the top schools on education and career path and university applications. And then in some of the lower schools, more so on conflict resolution. And there's nobody that's dedicated to just talk to them about their mental wellness. So go ahead, Trey.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there on the guidance counselor point. That is one of many pet peeves I have with the mental health system in Barbados. I just think it's ridiculous that there is one guidance counselor. In a lot of instances, schools would have up to 6 levels, so going up to 6th form. So you have hundreds of students, and you have one guidance counselor, and that guidance counselor has to be psychosocial support, a career advisor, a university application assistant, all in one. And Leila and Shakira, you rightly said that is overwhelming. And then I think that ultimately not only harms the guidance counselors, but then that also harms the children, because like not one person can do all of that. And then it personally frustrates me when I hear government officials on TV and the radio saying, oh, we need more social workers and psychologists in school. And I know for a fact that UE Cave Hill, there are so many social worker students and so many psychology graduate students who would love to work in schools, but then I think that goes back to the issue of funding, not creating jobs in schools for these persons to be able to support these children from a psychosocial perspective. So,
Yeah.
again,
Or even Trey, adding on to that, within the social work program at the University of the West Indies, they are supposed to be attached to an organization. And we know that not a lot of schools participate in this program. It's just a handful of schools that actually take on these social work students. And this is not at all, due to finances. This is, a free program, but just not all schools are taking advantage of it.
Yeah. And then there's also the issue that we found with kids of wanting to necessarily disclose certain things to their guidance counselor. They feel comfortable going for academic support perhaps, but when it comes to other things, they maybe want someone who doesn't know, or someone that can be separate to that, to talk about more personal things that they're dealing with, separate to academics. So needing to have more resource persons in school that kids feel comfortable actually approaching. I think that's the other thing, is that the approachability of some of these persons.
Yeah, I'm really glad we are talking about this topic because, as I said before, one of our main calls that we're asking for in this call to action is the prioritization of services, and that includes the presence of mental health services within the school system and increasing the presence of guidance counselors within our school system as well. You started talking about it a little bit Leila and Shakira, but can you give some more insight to some of the barriers to accessing mental health care in the Caribbean from what you've seen for children and young persons?
I think the main barrier, honestly, is just stigma. Even if we do have mental health professionals that are stationed in schools, and again, our primary focus point is in the schools and the child care board system and the government industrial schools. And so even if there were dedicated mental health professionals there's also just this, stigma associated with mental health for young people, especially for boys. Mm-hmm. We see this buzz term of toxic masculinity. And it really does affect the ability of young to be open and to seek care and to seek help and to deal with mental health issues. So I would say primarily, obviously, the stigma needs to be removed, and then, access, individuals, programs.
And then I think as a society, we need to look at some of the external factors that impact mental health. So the normalization of substance use, again, especially among certain communities, and the pressures that young people, and especially young boys, feel to, it's like a rite of passage. And then the normalization of certain forms of the normalization of secrecy with a lot of things. There's so many external factors that I think act as huge barriers to being able to really target what the mental health issues are. You can't talk about mental health issues with academics without looking at all the other factors that are impacting that child. When you look at, some kids, and many kids we know with COVID are reliant on school meals program. And then during the pandemic, they're at home and they're not having, the big meal that they would get in the day was at school. Don't have that anymore. How are they supposed to focus on academic stuff? How are they supposed to even begin to figure out how to access mental health services? I think the barriers are external as well and need to be looked at when we look at young people feeling, a lot of access to services.
And then I also just want to add in, and we touched on it earlier, just parents can be a barrier to mental health access. Yeah. Parents that just don't understand, just get to lessons, do your homework and quiet down. Why do you need to go out and socialize with friends? You need to just get to your work. I did it, get to lesson days. I mean, I don't know about the other islands, but in Barbados, it is almost, automatic that for every subject you're in, there are extra lessons. So it's not just the 7 hours a day that kids are in school, but they're also in extra lessons, and parents don't quite understand the effects on young people's mental health or the seriousness that it can have. And so they can often be a barrier as well, which is why we need to engage parents on young people's mental health.
Totally agree. And I want anyone in the chat, where I'm currently in Barbados, but this is a Caribbean Youth Mental Call to Action. If you're from another Caribbean country, if you're from Trinidad, Grenada, St. Kitts, Jamaica, give us some of the examples of some of the barriers or facilitators for, accessing mental health care. What are some of the things that you are observing in your country's context? Let us know in the chat as much as you can.
If I can jump in, I think what could also be a barrier in terms of someone re-engaging with mental health service in the future is the quality of service provision. And I'm going to tread very carefully here, but I've had conversations with persons who have, let's say, they accessed government-provided institutional mental health care. I shall just leave it there. Those who know what I'm talking about could fill in. They reported some very dehumanizing and stigmatizing experiences while they were in this institution. I remember I was on a panel with someone actually, and they said, and this one is in another Caribbean island, and they said that they had recently been attempt on their life, and they heard the nurse that was dealing with them. She was talking to another nurse, and she said something along the lines of, "Oh, I gotta go and check on that mad girl," and and I can only imagine how horrifying it is to be called mad in such a derogatory manner when you're literally at the lowest possible point that you could be as an individual. And then, unfortunately, I've heard other stories where persons have said that they felt like they were no longer human, or they were treated as some kind of social pariah because the stigma is that if you're in the mental, as we call it, you're mad. And I think that could be a deterrent to someone once again engaged in that service in the future, because that could just make how you felt in that moment worse. And then you're not going to be eager to be like, oh, let me go down there again to see if it could get help with this. So that's why I think too there needs to be mental health awareness training and sensitivity training, even for the service providers in Barbados and wider Caribbean, because as that, in most instances, you might be the first point of contact in terms of care, or you might be the main point of contact, and you are now playing a crucial role in terms of the delivery of that person's mental health service and their recovery. So I think that we need to do a lot better in terms of training the workers in mental health awareness and sensitivity.
Yeah, and I think absolutely true. Yeah.
If I just want to add on to what Trey is saying, I completely agree. And when we shift from the school setting and into our vulnerable youth settings, where we're dealing with institutionalized young people or young people that are in government care in the child care board system, one of the things that we see is that there's a lack of individualized care. So anybody with a mental health issue is treated the same, blanket. And then of course, that leads to deficiencies in their care. It leads to fear of accessing mental health care when they leave. And a lot of these vulnerable kids need to continue in care.
Yeah. And I think it's also that quickness to medicate, but not in tandem with therapy, which is so critical. And so it's sort of dulling sensations, but not tackling any of the issues. And again, so much of what you're saying, Trey, with just the language that we use around mental health is so stigmatizing in itself. And young people are so aware of that. They're hypersensitive to that. They're at an age where they are exploring their, who they are as a separate person. And they're even more hypercritical of themselves. And so when we think about anything that could be seen as negative, especially with mental health and the language we use, they're so much less likely to report instances of worsening mental health, especially with more significant mental health issues, which could result in needing to be hospitalized.
Right.
Lots of great stuff being talked about. We have a lot of comments in the chat as well and some questions. So I will kind of go in order of how it came, the questions and the comments. So we have a question asking, following up on what you just said with regards to we tend sometimes to medicate without therapy and vice versa. We have a question asking, do you think we need to raise more awareness on medical treatment of medicinal treatment of mental health illnesses? And that could be for anyone in the chat or on the panel right here on the line. What do you guys, what do you think about increasing the awareness of
I think that
medicinal treatments?
Yeah, I think when you think of young people and dealing with things like depression or adolescence is the age when so many mental health issues tend to be brought to the forefront. And the idea of stigmatizing medicinal intervention is an issue in itself, because so often that is necessary. You can try every other avenue to improve your mental health, but sometimes you do need a bit of medicinal intervention along with therapy in order to make an actual impact and see some substantial change. And again, I just don't think there's enough awareness of that. There's so much stigma around medication. And I think it is and you hear young people talking about it more and more, which I think is a really positive thing. But again, it's the parents that have to be involved in that process too, because they're the ones that would take their child to a professional that is able to prescribe.
And I think just following on from what Leila's saying, we need that shift in looking at mental health and categorizing it in the same way we look at health, physical health.
Yeah.
You know, and if we have, as Trey said, I'm not sure what you said, Trey, a toothache or whatever earlier, you take medicine. Well, a broken leg, you know, you get surgery and you take medicine to help you with that. Well, if you have an issue with your mental health and there are, you know, well-researched medications that are going to help you with your mental health, then absolutely, you know, why would you not take them?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in here, to echo what Leila and Shakira are saying, I very much do agree with the mantra of no health without mental health. But I also believe that mental health special consideration, and by that I mean in terms of how multifaceted it is. In terms of its causes, like there's no one singular cause of a mental illness. It could be something genetic, it could be something environmental. The person could have gone through a major traumatic event, which is why exactly. So all of that to say that even in terms of treatment, I'm an advocate for medication in terms of treatment. But as Leila and Shakira was saying earlier, I do believe that that shouldn't be done in isolation. You just give the person medication and then move on. That should be done in addition to therapy. And I think that should only be done when you've considered all the possible causal factors, because being quite frank here, some medications are not easy, especially antidepressants. There's like a 6-week period where you're just like, oh my God, sometimes you might feel worse than when you first started the medication. And I think facts like that have to be presented so that if you're starting that treatment, then you do so from an informed perspective. You understand all of the various factors that can be taken into consideration, and then you say, okay, medication paired with psychotherapy or some other form of therapy, that is the best course of treatment for me moving forward, and we go from there.
And I think this is Trey, absolutely what you're saying, and I think we're HCC and us at Dance for Life, when you really look at that whole person approach and what are some of the lifestyle factors that can be adjusted that could benefit mental health. So, you know, exercise, the foods that we eat and how that impacts mental health, you know, all of those things that we need to look at maybe before medication, but then, or in addition to, but there are so many different factors. Yeah. And it's not an easy thing to just jump on medication right away. And that needs to be acknowledged for sure.
But I think we also have to trust in our mental health professionals, the ones that are responsible for prescribing, and to know that prescribing medication for mental health issues is not done lightly.
Yeah.
And it is always done and should be done, as Leila said, in conjunction with talk therapy. And I guess that highlights, again, when we look at some of the mitigating factors for mental health conditions, as Leila said, predominantly, things like exercise and socialization. And that kind of comes back to one of the reasons why we see this mental health issues as a result of the pandemic, because so much of those coping mechanisms that young people had prior to COVID have been removed from them. So we see young people that may have been, had latent mental health issues, maybe had no mental health issues at all, but you remove all of those built-in, coping mechanisms, and then we see this explosion of mental health issues.
And not only just the removal of some of the healthy coping mechanisms, but an addition of some of the unhealthy, the increase in social media, the increase in just being in your home with potentially, abusive households, the increase of
not having that escape. A lot of children tell us, they come from chaotic homes. They come from homes with 1 or 2 rooms with multiple children and, generational, adults there. And school is a way to escape that. And when they were in the online space, it was just 24/7.
We're back. Continuing the discussion for a short, unexpected intermission break. I just want to apologize everyone for I cut out my internet company. It loves to embarrass me.
That's okay. It happens.
I'm loving the discussion we were having thus far, and I think really a lot of insight. So I'm just gonna give persons just about one more minute or so just to join us back as we continue.
Okay.
But in the meantime, while we're waiting, I just want to reiterate. Are you all hearing me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to reiterate that our call to action has 4 main asks and 4 key things that we're planning on going to policymakers for about and to demand that they prioritize leadership, which includes including youth within all of their policies, especially policies that involve youth. There's nothing, you can't do something for youth without youth. We want them to prioritize research, to identify all of the gaps with regards to mental health care and mental health care services within our region. So then we can better inform our policies. And we want all of our policies to be evidence-based and rooted within the research. We want our policymakers to prioritize regulation policies to ensure that we protect our young people and our Caribbean population from the health harming industries that are known to not only cause health harm, but also harm to our mental health as well. And then finally, we also want persons to prioritize services, and that's access to services, better services, more services within the mental health care space. And earlier in the discussion, we talked about more guidance counselors. We talked about parents being able to address mental service care with their children, and all of that is actually included in our call to action, where we encourage and we ask for mental health, psychological first aid, mental health first aid to be included in the services that are actually taught within our schools and educational facilities as well.
Right.
So that's to ensure that all of the points that are being mentioned and brought up in the discussion, it makes my heart warm to ensure that through all of the consultations that we've had in developing this call to action, we are actually hitting all of the points, and we've covered all of that in our call to action as well. And it really just proves to show how comprehensive the call to action is and how detailed and the time that it took to develop this comprehensive document that is hitting all of these points that's coming up in conversation with other young persons and persons who are involved in the spaces of young persons as well. So I just wanted to plug that as well. So if you're joining us, welcome to day 1, part 1 of our Caribbean Mental Health Call to Action Instagram Live series. We had a short intermission, unexpected intermission, but we are back. So just continuing the conversation about mental health care in the Caribbean and improving mental health care among youth specifically. Trey, you pride yourself in doing a lot of gender-based approaches and having a gender-based perspective on everything that you do. What do you think we can do to create a more tailored approach to mental health care among children and youth using that same gender-based approach and perspective?
Well, immediately I would say that in terms of the planning and the development of policy, because again, I will die on that hill. Policy is the most important thing, I think, for us as a region moving forward. But I think that any policy that's developed has to be gender responsive. And I also think that you have to, as the call to action is saying, you have to involve more people in these discussions and that development. You alluded to it, Stephanie. I remember I went to a congress. It was a very good congress to me. Sorry, that's an inside joke for myself. But right. And Leila and Shakira, I think you were at that congress, so the Caribbean Congress in Port of Spain. When we kept saying, you know, nothing for us without us as young people. And when I say young people, I mean all young people. Young people, that is a very diverse demographic. There's no one single typical young person. We vary in terms of, again, our gender identity, our sexuality, our mental and our emotional state. So I believe that as much as possible, you involve young people in these conversations. Young people who have access to technology, young people who don't have access to technology. Just make sure that everyone is involved in the conversation. And I think in policy development too, I think there's a need to involve what I term the gender experts in terms of these policy developments. I mean, in the Caribbean, we have people doing fantastic work on a number of levels, not just the academic levels, but the HGDSs at the Mono, St. Augustine, and Cave campuses, but we also have persons like Life in Leggings, those organizations, and all of the other, I'm thinking Feminine TT, I'm not sure if that's how you say it, I'm thinking Girls of a Feather St. Lucia. I think that these are all people that you involve in these conversations, and that's for life as well. Involve these organizations and these stakeholders in these conversations and this policy development so that you will never develop a perfect policy, but as comprehensive and as inclusive a policy as possible. And one last thing, policy development isn't just, you know, you develop a policy and you leave it there. It's something that's dynamic, it's something that's ongoing, and it's something that's responsive to the news. So if at any point those needs change, you monitor that and then you change the approaches as necessary. So that's how I think we could create tailored approaches for young people on multiple levels.
You know, I think that that's really important. And one of the, not one, but throughout the entire call to action, one of the main things, and as one of our principles that we have tried our best to carry forth throughout, is to ensure that, you know, persons from all different walks of life, all different situations, as you said, all different perspectives, persons living with disease, young persons, people from marginalized communities, persons from the LGBTQ community, all of them should be involved and at the table when policies are being implemented, because all of them might be affected in multiple different ways. And we have to ensure that we take into the perspective of everyone, because it is not a one-size-fits-all situation. And there are various nuances that come along each mental health issue and in policies in general as well.
Yeah. So I think was so great with the call number one, and that was what really resonated with us, is that in our work with young people over the years, I think what's become more clear than anything is that young people are the experts on the issues that affect them. They know better than anybody what they need, what their issues are, and you know, it's a sort of an untapped resource that if we just paid a little bit more attention and gave them a space to have their voice be heard, but not just heard in a meaningful way that can impact policy or impact changes, that, you know, so much more could be done that actually is impactful to them.
Yes.
More quickly.
Exactly. I would love person to, commenting chat suggestions on how you think, we can tailor our mental health policies and policies in general for youth to embark on and reflect those of various marginalized communities as well. Exactly here. Nothing for us without us.
Yeah.
I think that is something that we are resonating throughout and something that we want to continue to advocate for. Whether it be a mental health policy, you can't have a mental health policy without informed and consulting with persons who actually live with mental health issues on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Persons from different walks of life, different groups as well, and that's something we are also included. We have also included in the call to action to ensure that policies are reflected at, for different age groups as well as different sectors as well.
Yeah.
So we talked about this before, that it is clear that the pandemic had highlighted. It has highlighted various health issues that have come up among the general population, especially for Caribbean persons. And it has also highlighted some of the gaps and the problems that we have in our system as well. Not only for our young persons, but the caregivers and parents and persons who interact with youth on a daily basis. So from your perspective, Leila and Shakira, and from Dance perspective, the organization, what are some of the things that our children and young persons, as well as their caregivers, are asking for with regards to mental health resources?
I think one of the things we hear often are just mental health professionals on the school plant. That's, kids can access, whether it's before school, whether it's, lunchtime, after school. We talked earlier about some of the barriers, and I think one of the comments was cost. Obviously, this is something, if you don't have parent buy-in, you have parents that are, don't have the ability to go to a private doctor to address mental health issues. These are things that we need to look at incorporating within the school setting. And I firmly believe from a health economics perspective that you spend this money now and you save a whole lot of money years down the road. But that is one of the things that young people have asked about, as well as engaging parents, which we have started to do through parent-teacher organizations, just to talk about mental health, what young people are facing, the unique realities, as you said, that stem from COVID, but also that stem from uncertainty. Uncertainty around their academics, uncertainty, or a lot of kids were disappointed in CAPE and CSEC results the last couple of years, and that has obviously shaped their future. So just resources for them that are easily accessible and that are quality, as we talked about earlier, quality resources and resources for parents as well.
Yeah. And I think separate to maybe what young people are asking for, but what we've noticed and what you guys have highlighted in your call to action is just the need for stronger evidence. And that's something that we've been working on collecting over the course of the pandemic, just evidence to prove why it's so important that these things are needed. Because you can have policy, but then as well, the importance of implementing these policies is the next big challenge. Even when you look at the health and family life education curriculum across the Caribbean, there's so many things that are in place there, but are they actually being implemented, and are they being implemented without biases of the people implementing them? So the importance of trainings, of sensitization, as Trey was saying before, to make sure, as Shakira is saying, that these resources are of a quality that is acceptable, that isn't sort of working to the detriment of kids by having people that are maybe not well trained, that Trey, you were saying before, that first contact when someone is first vocalizing the need for help or for support is huge. And who are those people for these kids? Who do we have available in our community, in our schools?
And I think one of the things we've heard as well, this was, a young second form boy that said that when his teacher, he has a specific teacher, not his form room teacher, but she always starts her lesson with a wellness check and, you know, asks them and probes, you know, how are they doing? And she remembers, you know, and of course that's very individual. Not every teacher is going to be the same, but for him, it made a real difference in his day as it, you know, related to his mental health, you know? So I think wanting to be involved. Also, we've heard young people ask about, you know, accommodations for mental health days, you know, if they have assignments or many different assignments that are due or homework, you know, to understand when they feel overwhelmed and to have the school recognize the need for, you know, some sort of accommodation for them and their mental health.
Yeah, I think mentors as well is a huge thing that we can utilize a bit more in the Caribbean, especially when you think of mentorship for, I think, specifically young boys, and this, as Shakira was talking about before, that toxic masculinity, and not having enough positive male role models in the Caribbean. You know, so many young boys are desperate for that. And the moment that we get, I mean, even for us at Dance for Life, we rely very heavily on volunteers, and the majority of our volunteers are women, and that's wonderful. But many of these young boys need that role model that is a male, that is showing them different types of men, you know, men that can be emotional, men that can show
seek out help and seek out help if they need it.
And that, I think, would go leaps and bounds to improve, especially again looking at some of these more vulnerable youth that are so impacted by the people around them. We have some kids at schools that, you know, it is the rite of passage, where we talked about before with substance use, and, you know, oh, you're now 13, come have a joint, have, you know, and that is, if you don't do that, then you're abnormal. And so creating other avenues, especially for young boys, to see what they could be, is huge.
Really, really good insight. It is nearing the time for closure, and there are so many different, we could talk about this and mental health in the Caribbean and mental illnesses forever. At least I can, for sure. So just to wrapping up, we have our call to action. You know, this, for those of you who are now joining our Caribbean mental call to action is a document and is a, you know, advocacy like push that we are calling on our government policymakers, decision makers, to prioritize 4 key things: leadership, research, regulations and policies, and services. And these calls were actually informed by multiple consultations of youth and youth organizations and governmental agencies across the Caribbean, from as far north as Aruba and Jamaica to as far south as Trinidad and Tobago, and all in between. And really shows how powerful the message is that throughout the Caribbean, we have very similar problems that we are facing. And that's why we can come together as one Caribbean youth, and asking for these things and demanding that our governments and policymakers prioritize these calls. So wrapping up, Trey, Leila, and Sharika, do you have any final key messages that you want to put with regards to mental health services for the Caribbean? One sentence.
I think that, and I've said this already, I think we've all sort of said this, so it's just really reiteration, and I think it's, you guys are doing a great job already with this. It's just that same mantra of meaningfully engaging young people in all aspects of this call to action, making sure that their voices are heard, giving them that platform.
And I just want to interject, they are the experts. Not just their input, they need to be on decision-making panels as well, because more often than not, you know, youth participation or any type of marginalized group participation is left at just input. No, they need to be part of the decision-making process. Yeah.
And I think that if we give that platform, we learn so much more from young people than I think we could ever teach them, to be honest. And so they're a huge just untapped resource that we need to just continue paying attention to it and
just
giving them a huge spot at the table.
Yeah, recognizing the mental health issues that they're dealing with now are unique. It's not something any generation has faced in the past. And so we need to give deference to them and their realities.
Yeah.
For me, I just want to say less talk, more action, and directing that to the persons who are in positions of power, who have the ability to improve the mental health care system in Caribbean, but all they do is talk about it and say, oh, we need more of this and we need more of that. I want to see them doing more of this and doing more of that. That is all I have to say.
Awesome. So I also want to thank everyone for joining us today for our first instance of our Caribbean Mental Health Call to Action Instagram Live series. This is just part 1. Part 2 will be next week, Saturday, same time, 10 a.m., where we'll be giving more in-depth discussions about the call to action and the 4 calls that we're asked for and some of the actions that go along with them and how they can be implemented, as well as how they can, the impact it might have within our Caribbean population as well. So thank you all for joining us. Remember that you can look out for the launch of our call to action that's going to happen on October 10th. That's 9 days away. That is World Mental Health Day. Keep looking at our Healthy Caribbean Instagram page, Twitter, any kind of social media for input on it. We also be launching a pledge that will be coming along with the mental health call to action for persons that can commit to working towards improving mental health within the Caribbean, especially within our youth population as well. And there are many, many more things to come. There only so much I can describe by talking, but just keep a lookout. You can keep engaged in the conversation by using the hashtag no health without mental health, hashtag no health without mental health. And you can also use the hashtag normalize, destigmatize, and prioritize as well. So thank you so much for joining. We'll see you all again next week, Saturday at 10 a.m. on the same Instagram Live.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Just want to say thank you, Stephanie, and the rest of the HCC team for inviting us, and thank you, Trey, for some really great insights as usual.
Yeah.
And thank you. Yeah, this was a really great conversation. So again, to HCC, thanks for having us. Leila and Shakira, as always, it's been a pleasure. Look forward to working with you again in the future. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.